We'll call this meeting to order. I'm Councillor Beauregard, and I will be filling in for Mayor Steele, who is away on city business at Highway H2O St. Lawrence Seaway Conference. I'll now call this meeting to order. We'll go to the adoption of the agenda. Mover, Councillor Danch. Seconder, Councillor Bodner. That the agenda dated October 18th, 2023 be confirmed as presented. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passed. Go to the disclosures of interest. If any councillor has a conflict of interest they wish to disclose, please raise your hand now. Seeing none, there's no disclosures of interest this evening. We'll move on to item 4, staff reports. We will proceed with item 4.1-2024 operating levy budget 2023-161. I have mover Councillor Bruno, seconder Councillor Bagu, that Brian Bowles, Director of Corporate Services Treasurer, is here to present the 2024 operating levy budget. Please raise your hand if you have any questions for staff on this item. Thank you. Councillor Bowles and Director Bowles.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Council. Like our previous budgets, I'll go through a number of the slides, and then we'll stop at different times throughout, and we can go through a number of questions. Like that, we've had the conversation in our previous budgets as well. We put forward the budget today under with the assumption that I think I just lost my slide, but that's okay. We do put these budgets together with all the information that we have available to staff. The reality is, at the end of the year, we've seen in our forecasts and that budgets and actuals vary slightly, but at the end of the day, we always look for a balanced budget. And as we go through the presentation today, you'll see our forecast for this year, and it is for a slight surplus. So, as in my prior presentations, I have the same kind of format as we did with the capital budget, outlining the same process. Some of these slides will be a little bit of a repeat from the capital budget, so I won't spend a lot of time on some of them. The recommendation that is before you tonight is, one, to receive this report, to approve this report, and also we are looking to increase the amount of funds set aside for our working capital reserve. And just for Council's reminder, with respect to the reserve policy, we do have a working capital reserve. We put away, it's equal to about 10% of the levy. We put away funds every year for that. And the reason we have that reserve is municipalities are kind of unique animals in the sense that we don't get to issue capital. We don't get to issue debt for operating. So we keep some money in a working capital reserve to help fund when people maybe don't pay their receivables on time, or drainage, when we have to do drainage in advance and we have to pre-fund it. That's the fund that we use to do all of that pre-funding from. So we have a slide deck, and it's just bouncing around, so I apologize for anybody that might be watching on our YouTube channel, on the city channel. Our next slide, when we set up this budget, just as we did with the capital budget, we worked on it with respect to our vision, mission, and corporate values. We also have tried to build this with full alignment with respect to our strategic plan, which Council was able to approve earlier this year. And as we get going, I'd like to just point out a couple of the highlighted additions or changes in the budget. But if I can ask Council, I'll mention these now, and then I'll still do a couple more slides, because we can talk about these in detail when we get to the actual departmental budgets, because some of them may join in with some of the other conversations. So I'll just mention these as a high-level highlight right now, and then we'll have more conversation, I think, as we get to the back-end slides. So the one is physician recruitment. We are, as staff, proposing that we increase the physician recruitment budget. We know there's a lot of work going on within the city in different committees with respect to physician recruitment. It would see the physician recruitment double, and we've also set aside, and it's up to the committee and council going forward, that there would be additional funds if the council wanted to move forward with upping the grant that was available to be able to entice physicians to come to the city. The residential rebates, historically we've had a low flow toilet rebate. We had about a $1,000 budget. This year we're looking to increase our residential rebates to $10,000. That would include a rain barrel program that would still be, that is in development, and it would be worked on with the Environmental and Sustainability Committee. Canal Days is a big one. I think everybody had a great time. There is a Canal Days meeting on Monday of next week to debrief council on all of the information that we've received from our multiple stakeholders with respect to Canal Days. We are budgeting and looking at Canal Days next year will cost about $216,000. As well as community events are included in here. The community events were a new project this year, and I think they went over very well. We have a lot of positive feedback. There were a number of learning points, and we've looked to address those. As well as this budget increases or addresses the new CIP program, Council's already had a chance to look at that CIP program, which will be coming back later this fall for Council to approve. And the last one, which is one of the biggest ones, is the tree canopy program. We've been talking to Council about this. The goal within our strategic plan is to go from 32% to 40% of the city with respect to a tree canopy. There's a full report coming. This budget starts to set funds aside to be able to do that. I'll jump on a couple other slides and then stop if there are any questions. But again, we may want to get into the details of some of those additional programs as we go through the departmental highlights once we get to those. So I think it's important before we get started, and this has been the process that we've done the last couple of years, we've talked about what is included in this budget and what the cost of the budget would be. So the average house in the city is valued about $213,407. We'd be looking at roughly a 2.9% blended tax increase. Obviously, once we know what the region is, that would be in addition to the 102 that we've identified here. So the region's budget will have to go through their approval process, and then that would be in addition to it. Now, when we get to the 102, we talked about this previously, and there was a memo that went to council. 57% of our increase is actually going to the capital budget to address our infrastructure deficit. Only 43% of it is actually covering off the operating. And as mentioned previously to council, the tree canopy budget is included in that 43. So when we do that tree canopy project, it actually is being covered within our operating budget. And the rationale for that is it's going to be an ongoing project, and we can't capitalize a tree. So we put it into the operating budget. A couple other slides before maybe we stop for some questions. It's just the process. Just a reminder, we're on the levy budget right now. The levy budget pays for all the operating and the capital budget. So this is where the main funding component for that is. And then we'll move into the water, wastewater, and storm sewer, which we call the rate budgets. We'll start those going into November. And as we go through this, these slides we already talked about with respect to the capital budget, but it's just a reminder where we sit with respect to our competitiveness, with respect to property taxes, with respect to water and wastewater rates, and with respect to the total cost. And I think this is where I spent some more time on the capital budget, just talking about that if you take the property taxes the average resident pays, plus the storm sewer and the water wastewater charges, and compare that to the average of other municipalities in the Niagara region, we're actually slightly cheaper. We'll do an update once everybody has completed their budgets for this year. And then my last slide before we stop is just a reminder, as we put together budgets, there are often risks with respect to budgets, whether those be related to the government and policy changes, which we've been able to experience recently with respect to planning and building, or whether those be with respect to inflation, or whether they even be with respect to weather conditions. And when we get to talk about the beach, that's a great example where weather can impact our budget. We had in July 17 of the days were actually write-off days. We actually basically closed the beach. It was weather days, so you couldn't even go to the beach. So weather can have a big impact on some of our self-sustaining entities. So that's kind of, those are a number of slides that kind of set up the discussion for the budget. I don't know if anybody has any questions with respect to that setup.
Councillor, does anyone have a question? Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor. I guess I'll get to those highlighted ones when they come up. That's what you're like. I just noted one thing. I just think for clarity, like now and going forward, the 213,000 valued one, I think we should consistently be saying it's not a residential property valued at, it should be assessed at. I would like that wording changed, because I think a listener thinks, whoa, $213,000, you can buy a home in Port Colborne, an average home. That's what impact does. That's not necessarily value. Thank you.
To the deputy mayor, to the councillor and council, we can definitely make that adjustment. And I think that's a great comment, because the values that you see there are based on 2016 values, and taxes are distributed to residents within the city of Port Colborne based on MPAC's assessment back in 2016.
Right.
And that's why the values look significantly different than what I think people are used to seeing houses selling for today.
Thank you.
Just going off Councilor Bruno's point, maybe just a little blurb, even what the assessment is and who, like what you just said, essentially,
Right.
just outlining what the assessed value means. So, thanks.
That's great. So as we look into the city fundamentals and where the budget is made up, you get an opportunity to kind of see in this chart the changes between 2023 and 2024. It was actually a number of councillors on the last councillor, one was Councillor Wells, that had brought up that it would be nice to have a chart that would show exactly what percentage of the budget goes to each area. The one area I'd point out that I think, the two areas I'd point out that are interesting to see is the total cost the city is now spending of the levy dollars on administration is fallen significantly, down from about 12% to 10.5%. Actually, even the cost of council is down from about 1.8 to 1.4. But you can also see where the city is investing, and more of our dollars are going into capital. And you can see we were at 17% between debt and direct cash payments, and now we're at 20%. So this council has continued to invest in the infrastructure deficit. As we move forward and we built this budget, we just highlight again, we talked about this slide during the capital budget. We do have significant growth going forward, actually over, I think, and we got to see some of that in the last growth report. This slide was presented. Significant opportunity for the city to grow going forward, and we've had to take that into account. With respect to building the budget, it's always important to look at how you're doing this year. So staff did take the opportunity to go through all the accounts within the city to see the operations, and we've made our best, with the information we have, we've made our best assumptions. And right now we are forecasting. I know it looks like a very precise number. It's because there's a number of individuals putting in accounts and putting in dollar figures, but it is going to be plus or minus of that 123, but right now we are forecasting a surplus of about $123,000 come the end of the year. We're 2.5 months out, but that is our forecast as of right now. A couple other things when we were building this budget to take into account. Right now, the current position for the levy debt, you can see how it's decreasing over a period of time. While we are recommending, and we did recommend in the capital budget, that there would be debt for more water main replacement and storm sewers going forward, there is no debt on the levy going forward, so the debt is actually coming down over a period of time. And a couple other, I get asked this question quite often, is with respect to reserves. How much money do we actually have with respect to reserves going forward? And you can actually see here that our reserves at the end of 2022 versus our forecast to 23, and then our forecast with respect to this budget. And partly because the reserve balance is going up because we are putting funds aside for the stormwater projects that council's approved to look at. So it's not that we're putting money aside just because, it's because we're actually setting it aside so that way as the engineering work goes through, then the money will be there to actually do the work. Now, those are all my slides with respect to setting up the budget. I don't know if anybody has any other questions on those slides.
Councilor Elliott?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a couple of really quick questions. The city growth projections, capacity for residential development, 64 and change. Development pipeline. It says 4,149 units are in the development pipeline. Is there a breakdown of where in the pipeline they are? Or what type of units they are? Or shovel ready? Or is this just on the books?
So through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, there was a presentation highlighting that. Our planner isn't necessarily here at the moment, but we can bring that back and actually show you. I've been able to see a map that shows where the developments are going. So such a map is available to actually show you where that is coming. So that can be provided.
Okay. Just to kind of get a breakdown of where they are, what type of units they are, single family, multi-res, high density. And there's another question I had. Sorry, you were going so fast. In the levy summary, what are the number of net new units that are on the levy? Any idea?
Yeah, through the deputy mayor to the councillor, I think you're asking like how many housing starts, how many people. So,
How many people are we levying against new for, say, 23 going into 24?
right. So last year, I think there was 113, and this year there is 58 starts. So when they come on, it's always, there'll be some people that will come on right up till into the November period, so we don't know exactly, but I'm going to say there's probably about 60 new homes this year that will make the assessment list.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. That's good.
Any other questions? Seeing none, proceed.
So now I guess we get into the detail, and thanks, Council, for letting me run through that setup. So what we've done here is we've created a levy summary, which basically highlights what the total city revenues would be under this budget, personnel, operating expenses. Somebody did ask me, what do allocations to and from departments, and why does all zero? That's because internally we allocate some costs between departments because we're trying to do full cost accounting to see what certain departments might cost. For example, there are some things in rec that are done on the rec budget, but then we transfer the cost to the self-sustaining entity of the beach. So then we charge through the user fees the beach. But when you look at the consolidated city, all of those ins and outs become zero because it's a plus in one department and a negative in another department. And then we've highlighted the capital budget transfers that will go into the capital projects, and then reserve balances to and from, and then our balances to and from the rates and the library. And I have a slide for each of these, so that way you don't just have to see the number in total, so we can look at what makes up those. So I thought we'd start with the revenue at a high level, and then once we go through everything at like a revenue expense level, we'll redo the discussion basically at a departmental level. So that way you can see what departments got the dollars. So when you look at revenue, I went through it and we basically pulled out, here's where the big revenue line items are. Sponsorships, we're putting a big new emphasis on sponsorship for Canal Days. We have brought in a third-party expert to help us. It's not on commission, it's a flat fee program that we're doing, and we're trying to go after some of the larger sponsors that do large festivals. We are one of the 100 largest festivals in Ontario, and there is the opportunity to branch out to other areas to bring in sponsorship. Investment income, we have talked about interest rates before, especially in the capital budget. Interest rates are complicated when they go up because when we issue debt, they're higher. But on the flip side, when we're trying to save for a project and we're putting money aside, the amount of interest we can earn is actually going up. With respect to licenses and permits, there are a number of changes that have happened there. We do see, with respect to our license and permits and fees, we do see two departments coming back with additional reports, either by the end of the year or early next year. We feel that both building and planning are going to have to. When we originally set these fees and set the model for our building and planning departments about a year and a half ago, we didn't have 6,000 units, as Councillor Elliott pointed out on the list. And we have to relook at how that fee setup works. So they will come back with separate reports to council going forward. And then with respect to property taxes, and when we did the property taxes, it still works out to the 2.9 on the blended average, 102 per house. What's important to know is when we did the calculation, our assumption right now is there'll be a 1% growth in the levy assessment because of new assessment coming on. But we looked at a report from MPAC just yesterday because they're bringing on some of those houses and some businesses. And right now they're forecasting we could be at 1.4. So while I have 2.9 there, it could be lower than that based on how their figure comes forward. I don't know, that's high level at revenue. I know it's on a departmental level. You'll see it at a departmental level in a couple more slides, but I don't know if any council has any questions on the revenue. And then I'll go do all the expense ones in block.
I don't see any questions. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Aquilina.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Brian. Can you just expand on the sponsorship line for Canal Days so I get a fuller picture?
Yeah. Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councilor and Council, basically what we're trying to do is, and when we get into, I guess if we look at the departmental budgets, we're almost looking at a double to what we're trying to do for sponsorships with respect to Canal Days. The Canal Days, and we'll probably talk about when we get to the departmental, the budgets is becoming tight. The costs of Canal Days are going up significantly, whether it be for policing, whether it be for paramedics, whether it be for the vessels that come in. Everything has gone up significantly post COVID. But the reality is most people, and well, everybody we've talked to in our debrief groups, and we'll be sharing all that with council members that are on the committee on Monday, want to see Canal Days maintained or grow. And because of that, finding a way to cut the costs when the inflation in that is hitting that is difficult. So staff are proposing that we take maybe a different tactic to sponsorships, and we actually have a meeting tomorrow with respect to the individual we're bringing in to help us give some ideas. And in doing so, we budgeted a goal that would increase that sponsorship goal by another $80,000 here.
Councilor Aquilina, you good? Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, go ahead.
So on the next slide, what we've tried to break out is, and I think I've said this to council before, it's one of our largest, maybe our largest single expenditure is people at the city. And I think it's very important that council can see year over year, because sometimes there's people they change their reporting units, who they report to, et cetera. But it's important to be able to see consistently from year to year how many people are in each department. We have shown that here, and you will see that year over year, the number of FTEs is down about 3 overall. And when you're wondering, well, how does an FTE get calculated? We basically take what a full work week is, or not work week, a full work year is, and we normalize that. Some people that are maybe on, we perhaps say an outside worker, they might work a 40-hour week. Some might be an inside worker, an administrator that they might work a 35-hour week, and you get paid differently accordingly, and you get paid for those hours. But we normalize all of that to come up with an FTE, because they have different numbers of hours, and those head counts can be different because of that. So a common mechanism is to use FTE. We call it full-time equivalents. It's to average out how many people we have within the city. And you can see that we have about 165 this year, where we had about 168 last year. And then we've tried to calculate it with and without students too. So you can, because some people say, well, if a student's here for 4 months, how does that impact all of the calculation? And that's what we've showed here. And we've also showed how many hours that would mean, how many hours our base we're base paying for. So we've shown that we believe that we can maintain our current levels of service going forward with respect to this FTE complement, even though it is down going into next year. And then on a dollars and cents, when you take the salaries going forward and budget it into next year, we are up on the salaries, even though we're down in complement. The benefit line, because of some adjustments, we have been able to maintain the benefit expense. But I will point out, and I thought it was important to show council, something that is a budget pressure going forward is there has been changes, for example, in the CPP plan, how it moves forward. Actually, there was a paper and there was an article in the paper just a couple days ago talking a little bit about how benefits are changing. But for the next couple of years, the CPP amount that we put into each we pay for each employee is going to go up by about 10% a year. So that's just one of those budget pressures that we're going to have to work on absorbing as we go forward. Same for employment insurance. Those are two areas that on benefits we are going to see future growth. And then I'll just do this expense one and then we'll stop for questions. So when you look at the operating expense, the day-to-day, there are a couple areas. We talked about, and during the capital budget, that the computer software cost was going to go up, but we were also adjusting the number of people for efficiency that was going to try to help offset that. Contracting costs, there is, I think it's appendix, I'm going to get this wrong, appendix E and F of the budget, but you can get into more details of what contract service is with respect to ditching, grass, pavement markings, and any questions. I know Steve Shapowski, our Director of Public Works, is looking forward to answering those with respect to it, but there is some cost pressures there. The net cost of borrowing, you might be, well, if there is no new borrowing on the levy, why is it here? It's because we run the whole capital budget through here. So that increase in cost is what we approved in the capital budget to pay for all the water lines. Now, we also, you'll see another slide where the water budget reimburses us for that in this budget. So it's a net no cost for the levy, net no impact. Grants and sponsorships are in here. The biggest is because of the physician and recruitment and the improvements to the CIP program, which we've brought in front of council. Insurance, and I know Councillor Bagu had put forward a motion that we should RFP it. We have, the RFPs are in, and they are long and substantial to reading. So staff are going through it right now, but we have included a budget for it. It is one of our largest expenses. Insurance is about 3% of the total levy cost. And then R&Ms are grouped with, which is primarily the tree canopy cost within there. But again, if you go to Appendix E and F, and happy to take any questions on those, it lays out everything in detail where those costs go. I'll stop there. It's a lot. That's all the people costs and the operating costs at a high level.
Okay. Councilor Bruno?
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Through you to Mr. Bowles. I think for the, I don't know about my colleagues, but I think for anybody reading this budget, we're all used to seeing, to make it understandable, full-time employees, part-time employees, student, volunteer firefighters. I think that breakdown would be extremely helpful. I get what you're doing and I get why you're doing it, and I get that it's also easier to compare year over year. But could we have just a composite list next time or forwarded to us as to how many full-time employees there are, part-time and that? Because, you know, you could get more volunteer firefighters, but the cost is the same because the stipend put forward is, right, whatever it is, times a full-time firefighter. So on the surface, that could look as more full-time employees, but in actuality, it's not any more money. And I guess I'm trying to simplify it for the general public and for ourselves each year, if you could do that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor and Council, we're happy to show out, to send something out for headcount. Something to point out that might not have been self-explanatory on this sheet is, for volunteer firefighters, because they don't actually have an hour requirement, they get it's a calculation of how they're actually not in this figure.
Oh, okay.
So just for council to look at this, when we give you a head count figure, it's going to be very similar to this. The reason why we shied away from head counts, one of the other reasons is, and maybe we can break out the FTEs between full-time and part-time FTEs, but the head count was becoming a little bit of a complex situation because we have a number of shared employees, i.e. they're like, until this year we had one in the museum and I think one in the library, and this year that's not the case, but that was like kind of the go-to to explain how it is. But in rec, there's a number of shared employees between different locations. People bounce between the marina and the Parks Department.
Right.
So because you get shared, when you put a head count on both, you don't want to double count
No.
them either. That's why we got ourselves into this FTE world. But we can break out FTEs to show you who's, like, what percentage of those are full-time versus part-time in that. We can definitely give you some more information there.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, continue.
On the transfers to capital and related projects, this was just kind of the ins and outs. So this was just a reminder how we got to the total capital transfer. And this, I don't know if council wants to bookmark this one, because this is the most asked question I get during the course of the year. Is there's an aggregate resource trust basically we get for with respect to quarry operations, and this is the amount of money that we budget to get, and it varies year to year, but this is how much we got in the previous year. There's the Canadian Building Fund we get, the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, and then we have some funds moving between reserves to fund capital, as well as the rate budget fund sum of capital, and then the levy, that 382, that's what's included in this budget for a net total capital budget of the 6 million. The next slide really shows, well, what's the activity between reserves? We don't have a lot of funds transferring in and out between reserves, but we do put aside, just to remind council, funds every year. We save up over the course of council for the municipal election. It used to be 40,000. We've done some recalculations. We're recommending to leave it to put it at 50,000 going forward. Costs go up for the tabulators and the technology that we need to do it. So that's one of them. The marina. Well, as we get to the budget, you'll see that the marina is budgeting to be able to put $50,000 into reserve. That will become the capital reserve for the marina to be able to do work going forward. Drains, every year we budget money to put into the reserves for drains, because when we do a drain and we bill everybody, part of the drain is our responsibility quite often, and we'll have to pay our share, and that's how we do it. The marina is repaying a loan from the reserve for $100,000, so every year they do that. There's the contingency reserve that we do put funds aside for the contingency reserve, because a couple years ago, we looked at our reserves and we said, where are we going to allocate them? Because I think we had something like 60 reserves, and then we said, well, how can we allocate them to make them better understandable and more accessible? And one of the reserves actually related to the Godrich building, and we had a conversation about moving that reserve into a contingency reserve and growing it over time, because whether it be for that building or whether it be for something that the city might need to on an emergency basis deal with, putting funds aside is an important process. Interest on reserves. So while we actually do make interest on the funds in the reserves, and you saw the budget dollars went up for it, we do put about 40% of that back to the reserves, because about 40% of that is directly related to the reserves. So the reserves grow because of interest earned. And council established a fund a couple years ago to actually put funds aside for post-retirement benefits, future employee benefits. One of those, and the largest, actually relates to putting funds aside for insurance we no longer have. So with respect to presumptive cancer legislation, we now put funds aside because we don't have insurance if an employee, specifically a firefighter, was to get ill or unfortunately get one of the presumptive cancers on the list. So we have to self-insure, and we put funds aside every year for that. The last one is just it talks about the capital reserves that transfer between the two on the previous slide. And then I think this will be a good start to take a pause, because the next section is getting into the actual departments.
Councillor Bodner, and then
Stay lit. There we go. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, through you to the Treasurer. The aggregate resource trust that we get from the quarry, does that just kind of go into general use, or is it peg for roads or anything like that?
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, we do have a separate sheet earlier on in this big binder that we can go into. We actually put it all to roads.
Okay.
I think that's where council probably thinks where it should go, since it's kind of generated because of its use of wear and tear on the roads with respect to moving the stones.
Sure. And just to follow up to that, so that's what I understood it went, and it should go. If staff was ever of a mind to change where that went, I would hope you would have to come to council and ask for that change, not just shuffle the deck.
Director Bowles?
Yeah, through the mayor, or through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, 100%. And another flip side is if those funds were to stop coming, we'd then have a budget shortfall in our roads budget, and we'd also have to come back to council
Right.
with respect to that to figure out. So if we weren't getting those funds 100%, we'd be in front of council.
Okay, that's fine, thanks.
Councilor Bruno?
Thank you. The line that said the marina's putting aside a reserve, and I think it was 51,000 and change. So is that coming as a self-sustaining entity from the, if there's a profit at the end of the year?
Director Bowles?
Yeah, through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, that 100% is coming from the marina itself, and it goes into the marina reserve. So ultimately, as we move forward into next year, I'll hopefully be introducing maybe at the next council meeting our new director of recreation, and between our supervisor of marina and rec, we'll be putting towards a plan with respect to some capital requirements going forward at the marina, and this is where we'll be funding it out of.
Okay, so it's not from the levy.
This is not from the levy.
Thank you. Just the other question I had about, and I'm not disagreeing with Councillor Bodnar about where the aggregate money goes. At the end of the day, I think logically it would seem that, your roads get banged up, right, and you put that back in. But isn't the reality that if you look at the quarry, it has the frontage road there and about, I don't know how many feet of second concession, right, till it gets to it. And then, well, I guess it does have second concession on the other side of 140 down to the dock. But I guess I'm wondering if you looked at that footage of roadway and with the asset management people of when that has to be replaced, is there room that money should go elsewhere? In other words, if the road, the quarry vehicles are banging up, is generating more money than the replacement and resurfacing of those roads? I just didn't know if there's another rationale that I'm missing.
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, and I always appreciate my CEO because sometimes he has even more background than I do on these things. But I guess my comment to that is the calculation is actually done at a Ontario-wide level. So when we get those funds, what specific road like it's being used on, staff haven't done the analysis. Staff are saying that the funds have been calculated so the city of Port Colborne is getting X amount of dollars. So we're utilizing it across because we're not trying to presuppose where a truck is going or if it's coming back down and going out to Waynfleet or going down to Fort Erie or going within the city. And we've bought from different quarries even this year with some of the work that we've had to do with roads and parking. So it could be on any number of the roads within the city. So we've never tried to identify, that causation. We know that work has been done at a higher level than us to calculate, and that's how the calculation works to give us dollars. But we've never tried to zero in on what road is being most impacted.
I guess what I was thinking of is maybe that money some of it could have went to environmental initiatives, because obviously aggregate extraction, right, is a stress on the environment, right? And does it make sense to find its home there? At the end of the day, it's all one pot, and if you don't put it towards roads, you're just putting the rest of the levy money towards roads. But I just wanted to have a better understanding of why it's going to roads, but that suffices. Thank you.
Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through to Brian. Just rewind back to the elevator reserve fund. Touch on that again, on where the reserve is going or what you're doing with it. It was always my understanding that we had to keep that money in reserves because at the end of the day, we're responsible for the deconstruction of the elevator. And then that fund was supposed to be held in reserve. So I thought I heard you say that you were looking at doing something else with that.
Director Bowles?
Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor and Council, I'm going to say it was 2 years ago that we looked at all of the reserves, and we noted that the cost of decommissioning it was, I'm going to say like 3, 4, 5. It was significantly more than the dollar figure that was there. And what we ended up doing was taking the dollar figure and putting it into, because most municipalities have a contingency reserve in case something goes wrong, and we said that we would put and grow that reserve over a period of time. But it was also stipulated that, and that's what we called it, the contingency reserve, at any point in time in the course of the year, if something happened, there was an ice storm or something, and we were short somewhere, we would utilize that reserve to be able to do that. Because we had no legal requirement to put the funds aside. It was just that ultimately we would have to become responsible under decommissioning unless other action was taken to decommission it, maybe in a more cost-effective manner. But by and large, that was the conversation at the time, that we would retitle the reserve, because we needed as a city a mechanism to be able to utilize a reserve like a contingency reserve should a situation in addition to the grain elevator show up.
Okay. I guess I must have been wrong, because I was always under the impression that it was mandated that we had it separate in its own reserve if anything happened, because we are tasked with maintenance and repair on the building itself. So I guess if CAO wants to chime in, or
through your worship, through acting mayor to Councillor Elliott, I am of the other opinion that it wasn't necessarily mandated. I know that money came to the city as a reserve from the federal government upon the transfer of the asset, but I don't think it was ever earmarked or sorry, it was earmarked, but I don't think it was regulatory requirements that made it earmarked. But I will do some digging, make sure that we haven't, sort of moved in the wrong direction. I'm sure we can revisit it if we have, but I'll satisfy senior staff here. Senior staff will satisfy themselves that we're on the right track legally.
okay.
Any further questions? Seeing none, continue.
Thank you. So as we get into the departments specifically, just to highlight on the departmental slide, you'll see the totality of all of the departments, I think, has a total net increase of about $285,000 or 1% on the levy. And then our groupings of what we call global, and we'll go through that, the programs, grants, and activities, and boards and commissions, boards and committees make up the difference of the increase. So when you look at the programs, grants, and activities, PGA, the total budget's about 1.6, almost 1.7 million dollars, and you can kind of see the salient changes from last year. Canal Days is up, and I'm sure there's going to be we'll have some questions on that. So after I talk about this slide, we'll do all the questions on this particular slide because there's a lot on it. The community events is up. That was something we brought in last year, and we were trying to bring in a standardized rule that we'd use 1/3 of the levy to fund that, or 1/3 of 1% of the levy. The CIP program, which I have mentioned tonight, And then the grant committees, and I'll just highlight, staff are recommending that we have the ability to go and talk to Bethel and Shirkston to increase their grants to be the equivalent of some of our other seniors groups. Those grants that they have been stuck there for a lot of years, and there probably is some adjustments that are needed with how we operate, and providing some additional funds might make it easier going forward to have those conversations. So staff are recommending that. We also point out that our Hospice Niagara commitment over 3 years has now been completed. Pathstones, we maintain that, the budget there for it, so the budget dollars are there. If council wants any additional information on the Pathstones that we've been doing the last couple of years, we can bring back a separate report with respect to that. The physician recruitment, as mentioned in the highlights, I think that's an important one that we're hearing from committees, that especially with respect to our strategic initiatives for health and wellness. And I think it might have been Councillor Dance that even brought up the whole concept of making sure that health was a key priority in our strategic plan. And then the residential rebates, which really brings in the Rain Barrel program. So these were kind of the big changes within that sector. And I'll just stop there because I suspect council probably has a number of questions on some of these changes.
Councillor Hoyle?
Through the Deputy Mayor to Mr. Bowles. It says the Canal Days is basically $116,000, right? We had budgeted for 100 previously. Roll over, that's fine, it happens. But now we're asking to double it to 216, I believe. Even if I do some math of calculating a 3.9% inflation, I get nothing near that double number. So can you explain how or why that's coming about?
Sure. Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor and Council, Canal Day is an interesting, I guess, event. Post-COVID, staff said that we were trying to look at the budget, and we knew that we weren't sure if there was going to be a 2022 Canal Days. So we cut the budget significantly down to the 100 range. And then we rolled that through going into 2023 because we were trying to hold the line on the property tax, and as you noted, we're over budget on Canal Days. And we're over budget because since COVID, costs have gone up significantly. Unfortunately, washroom facilities, the total cost of washroom facilities, it came in at almost $45,000, even with quoting for washroom facilities for Canal Days. And we can go through a number of costs components, and we will be going in detail with the committee on Monday with respect to some of those costs. So costs have gone up significantly. I actually pulled out our old treasurers, or our previous treasurers, not necessarily old, but previous treasurers book with respect to the budget. And I was seeing in 2018, it was, I think, 226,000. I'm looking at a highlighted line of 2019, 238,000. So I do realize our total number of 100 plus the 116 for 216 is higher, but it's going back to where we were several years ago before COVID, when we were trying to see how we can bring the cost down. But I can say, and I know committee members have seen some of this over time, the cost, and whether it be for entertainment, whether it be for the vessels, it is there. And that increase is with staff recommending moving forward on significantly increasing the advertising and sponsorship budget as well. So I look to, council to give us any advice on how you want to proceed.
Go ahead, continue.
Is this one of these things that we should put like a placeholder on? Because you still have a meeting, and that number could change next week when you guys meet.
I'll just say, through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor, if Council approves the budget today, it only goes to Council. So the Council meeting's on Tuesday. So if you were to approve the budget and the committee meets on Monday and says they don't like something they see, they can bring it up at the council meeting on the Tuesday, and we can adjust it right at the council meeting on the Tuesday, should they not, should you, it's just a simple way to proceed on it.
Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Acting Mayor. One of the things a couple years ago, remember bringing forward, because we all get asked, well, how much does Canal Days cost? And so rather to get into the 100,000 and how much the bands did and all that stuff, it was tried to be simplified by doing this $20 a household when we asked the question. It seems to me, and then now we brought it back because we thought we could save more money, and now it's back and it's the same as it was in 2019. I'm wondering, just like some other things we do, if we looked at the Canal Days budget at being $20 per average house, would we not be dealing with this thing in the gyrations that it has? But more importantly, we already know that in inflation versus inflation in that area may be two different things. But I think more importantly, if we're going to grow the city with those new homes and all of this new assessment, and we're still tracking at $20 per household, it will get a natural increase that can make it either bigger or better, or in the wisdom of the corporate services, maybe it gets a reserve for gyrations or whatever. It just seems to me that capping it at a number that allows it to, I guess, not be the subject of a great long explanation every year, but that the citizens know that on a per household basis, it's not going to rise. Now, I suspect if you had some freakish thing, or if it rains for 3 days of Canal Days, that might not work. But I think I'd like to see it get a rhythm that people can A, understand, B, it has a chance to self-grow based on a predictable budget increase in that department. I throw it out there. It doesn't need to be done for this budget, but I'd like it to be looked at and perhaps discussed at the Canal Days Committee for a long-range view of Canal Days.
Director Bowles?
Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor and Council, I think from staff's perspective that does the work to put on Canal Days, they'd appreciate some guidance or line of sight like that. It is interesting because discussions for entertainment and that for next year has already happened, and we'll have conversations with respect to the committee on Monday with respect to that. But from a competitive perspective, to be able to book and plan things out, sometimes get multi-year deals on a contract, having that line of sight would be beneficial for all those that are working on planning out Canal Days.
Just one last thing, maybe it doesn't need to be tied to an average number of houses or what you call a household. I don't know whether it's better to be a percent of assessment, but I think I'll leave that to the Canal Days Committee and to the director.
Councillor Bayview?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. As most everybody knows, Deputy Mayor and myself are on the Canal Day committees, and I know I'm going to be there next Monday, and I'm pretty sure the Deputy Mayor is going to be there also. And I'm sure if anything comes up, we will let Council know by next Tuesday for sure. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, I can concur with you that we can do that. Yeah. Yes, Councillor Bodner.
I think the points that Councillor Bruno brought up are important to get some kind of steady, predictable increase, because being on that committee, I know if you don't book the talent early, you're scrounging to find some because everybody else is out there to do it. So there is that pressure on the committee and staff to be able to move that in that direction. So I think those conversations should be had sooner rather than later. Thanks.
Okay. Also, in regards to some of the comments that were made, so the discrepancy from previous years to the increase that's going on this year, is any of it have to do with some grant funding that we had for Canal Days as well in past years and that are not available this time around?
Yeah, so through yourself to yourself and the council. So the in the forecast which we've identified, yes, definitely in the forecast it did. We are budgeting to get the grant, and we have talked to individuals how we can get back on track to get a larger grant for Canal Days. But with the forecast and why we were over budget, we didn't get the normal grant that we get this year, and that was one of the reasons why our budget to actual is out.
Councillor Bayview?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I do apologize. Councillor Ron Bogner is also on the Canal Day Committee. Sorry, Councillor Bogner.
I thought maybe it was a coup or something.
Okay. Would you like to take more questions on this slide? Is there any other questions? Councillor Hoyle?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Brian. I just have one quick question. The community events, 28,000, budgeted for 54,000, and then increase to 82,000, I believe.
Yeah.
For that. I mean, we didn't even get to the 54,000. Is there a staff projects it's going to go that much up? If we, I imagine the biggest expense of that was the concert series. They're expecting that much of an increase when they haven't even made it to the previous budget yet.
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council. So we actually are we're hoping to also bring the concert series and and utilize the Canal Days Committee to give you an update on the concert series, because there's a lot of connectivity with respect to that. But and maybe, and I apologize to the councillor, maybe it was a different line that you were looking at, but we're actually on the community events, we're actually slightly over the budget. We're actually more than slightly. We're almost at, I think, and if you look deep into the lines, we're at about $100,000 versus the 60 or 62. And council will know we did make changes because of that being over budget to how we operate events going forward, so that doesn't happen. And that was a meeting we had earlier. So I don't know if that answers the question, but ultimately the increase really goes down, because last year we said we'd like to move towards 1/3 of 1% going towards this budget. And this budget also, just for council knows, doesn't cover just the community concert series, which we'll be planning 7 next year. It also includes the Easter egg hunt. It also includes the Canada Day. It also includes the budget for New Year's / over the Christmas period. There's a number of community events that are included in this, and one of them one of the most significant expense drivers for us is fireworks these days. Fireworks is becoming one of the most expensive items in our events to actually do. Although I think everybody agrees the fireworks shows have been fantastic this year.
Councillor Aquilina?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Brian. If we go back to my first question about the sponsorship, will that sponsorship also include community events as well as Canal Days?
Yeah.
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the council and council, yes. So we're also, I actually put it on record. I think the CAO even said he was going to get in and help guarantee that we hit some of those sponsorship numbers this year. So, I'm going to be in trouble tomorrow. But yes, we are trying to up the sponsorships for the community events too. And we're hoping this is a starting point of it, and we can have some more conversations about how this can grow. We're definitely hopeful for what we've learned about how to bring in sponsors that we don't traditionally have at this event.
Councillor Bodnar, then Councillor Big.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, through you to the Treasurer. And while this isn't a discussion for tonight, will we be looking at, you notice some fireworks shows are being replaced with drone shows? Can that be a part of some conversation at some point, just to see what the options are on that? Thanks.
Director Bowles.
Through the deputy mayor to the council, yes. And staff have already had some conversations, and last week we got to have conversation with some different vendors that actually do it. So there is some complexity, especially with respect to where ships are in the canals at different times. As we look to make 18.1, 18.2, and 18.3 more accessible for the larger crafts that will come in there, that is going to potentially down the road, once that construction's done, require us to rethink where the fireworks go off. So those are things that we have to start planning now, because one day we may have to have that conversation. But for 2024, we're still planning fireworks.
Councillor Bayview.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I got two questions, one on community events and one on residential rebates. The community events, I know Councillor Bogner talked about the eclipse next year, whether the city's going to plan to have something to do with it, but I think maybe through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and the CAO, can we, council, sort of get an update on all our community events happening for 2024? Like, it's sort of like, I didn't know we were going to have more community events, concert series. I didn't even know we were going to have them for 2023 until he started.
Would Director Bowles and then maybe CAO Louis after?
I think the CAO is happy to answer that, so I'm going to let him.
Sure. Through the acting mayor to Councillor Bagu, and I think that's a great question and very fair question. You know, sometimes we bring a staff report to council that says, you know, it's May, it's the first council meeting in May, just so everybody knows, somebody's asked to have a hockey tournament or you know, have a sailboat race or have a, you know, submarine race in the canal. And we want staff to work with them. It's in September, yada, yada, yada. But other times, it's actually part of the budget process that gives us the approval as staff to go forward. So, you know, it might not say on these sheets and on these pages that we're adding one cell phone and that one person's going to get another cell phone and the cost of the cell phone's $1,000 and the cost of the monthly is $30 and so on. But if we added $360 plus $1,000 into the cell phone budget, you would be approving it by approving this budget. Now, that's not to say that we try to sneak things under the radar by putting them in, burying them in the budget where they're hard for council to see. The largest purchases in terms of cost are capital, and you see all of those when you see the capital budget. But the concert series additions are part of sort of the strategic plan pillars. Sorry, I was losing a word there. That are designed around community building and economic development. One of the things that we talk about offline and at the staff level and sometimes at meetings with others, for example, just last week, the mayor and I met with a bunch of practitioners from the medical community. I think he reported that here, or maybe that was, he reported it was going to happen. And we sort of talked about economic development as promotion of quality of life. And so one of the things that we do is we have events on West Street. We have fishing tournaments that we try to bring in from outside providers. And one of them is the concert series, farmers market, and so on. So the concert series started off last year. I think that we've had a little bit of discussion about it, including in this chambers, with a bit of a pitfall, a bit of a misstep. But we were able to bring it on stream. We had very positive feedback, and we've been working with the city's Canal Days concert promoter to arrange for the continuation of it next year. And so that's what's before council today. And I'm sorry that it comes as a surprise to council members, but this is sort of like, there was no staff report that said, just so you know, we're asking for permission for a 7-night concert series, and you'll see it in the budget. This is the ask. This is the ask. I don't know if Brian wants to jump in. I see his hand waving there. So,
Go ahead, Treasurer Bowles.
Through the deputy mayor to council, just to add to what the CEO said, so the concert series came in last year. This is a continuation of it. And what we do hope from a process perspective to do differently this year is staff have already identified the dates, already identified themes. We know that some councillors have noticed ads for different types of themes over the last little bit. Even one was country was an example of a theme. So staff have tried to work with the promoter to be able to develop those. And we're hoping we will be bringing back that list with dates to get feedback. And our view is we would use the working committee of the Canal Days to also be as the guiding post for the concert series and kind of bring that up at that point in time. So some council members can actually talk about that. The other comment is just on the community series. Staff is pretty much in a package together that we'd be able to, instead of this year, it was kind of, we were building it as we went. Staff will be able to announce the concert series as everybody comes to the festival that we have, whether it be the Santa Claus Parade, which I think is actually on the council agenda next week, or the week after that with respect to the parade route, or we're going to have it available at the Valley Health and Wellness Center when we do the holiday get together where children come in and get to have a chance to play, and then we do the fireworks. So we'll have information already available for next year for these, so that way people can plan their year in advance. So quite a bit of work has already gone into this. Should council want to proceed, then we'll move forward with hiring bands and getting the word out very early this year.
CEO Louis.
sure. Just a final word for Councillor Bagu through you. I don't want him to think that council doesn't have the power in this arrangement. It is certainly the case that council decides and staff executes. Sometimes you'll have a staff report before you that says pave the road or don't pave the road, and that's your chance to decide. But in reality, for this $1.7 almost million, now is the time to decide. And I know that some of these events there's varying opinions in the community. Not everyone likes Sport Fest because maybe they don't play hockey or snow pitch or trivia contests and so on. And maybe they've asked you at the door when you're campaigning or in between elections to revisit that. Fishing tournaments, municipal election we can't really cancel. But some of these, physician recruitment, I think some of these go back and feed back to our strategic plan. Some of them are staff bringing them forward because we think that is what makes the city look good, and by extension is what council wishes for. But the time to, add to CIP incentives because you want to see more growth in the downtown, or to take away from Sports Fest because you don't think it delivers value to the community or matches our mission, vision, and values, is really today. I think so the option is before council. But staff have put them here because it's sort of some of what we always do and will continue to deliver for residents, and it's some new ideas that we have to continue on the implementation of our objectives.
Councillor Bagu.
To you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, thank you, CEO and Director Bowles. My next question regarding residential rebates. I know Councillor Hoyle and I are both on the Environmental Advisory Committee, and the low-flow toilet program has been kicked around a few times, and it's my understanding it's back to city staff right now, but it's pretty well a consensus that there's no sense continuing the low-flow program because most toilets you buy now are all low-flow anyways. And so probably, if it's okay with council, we could switch over, if it gets discontinued, to put it towards a discounted rain barrel program, which I'm excited to see. And whether the people get 50% off discount or something like that, Mr. Deputy Mayor, or whatever, but that'd be definitely a good program. My other question regarding this, because it's under such a vague term, residential rebates, does that also include the tree rebate program, the lateral line program, the sanitary sewer line program, or is that something totally different?
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, all of those programs sound like they're rate budget programs. So when we come back in November, you'll get an opportunity to talk about the lateral programs and et cetera. So we actually have some additional information to share with you with respect to that, how many people have taken them up, for example, this year. And we've noticed that on those grants / loans that not too many people are interested in the loan, but more people want to talk to us about the grant. So it might be something how we establish those programs to make sure people are actually, it's enough for them to take in and jump in. So we're hoping to talk to council when we talk about the water and wastewater budgets to talk about those lateral programs.
Councillor
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
To you, Councillor Bayview, if you do want to bring a motion forward to amend the motion that's before us to address that low toilet program, you can. Well, we could do that later on in the afternoon.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think it should go through the Environmental Advisory Committee before I bring it to council, or Councilor Hall brings it. I don't want to circumvent the committee by bypassing him, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Through your worship, and I sense that you leaned over to the clerk and got her advice, and I certainly don't mean to contradict that advice, but I think that we can take this, if the $9,000 amount that is in there, or sorry, is 9,000 the total, or is 9,000 the increase?
Sorry, 10,000 is the total, 9,000 is the new for the rain barrel program, 1,000 is what we have for the low flow toilet program.
Right, so I think if the environmental committee had I think we're approving the budget for an and we can flip it over and we can extend the number of rain barrels, because I know they sell out sometimes, or we can extend the amount on each rain barrel. But if you're willing to trust staff's judgment with the extra $1,000, we can do it on approval of the Environmental Advisory Committee, because it's not a change to the budget, it's just a change to the bucket in the budget, right, Brian?
I would agree.
Okay, yeah, we could do that. I don't see any other questions, so go ahead and continue.
So the next big section is boards and committees, and that includes library, archives building, museum, Roselawn, Niagara South Coast, and a number of our committees. You can see on the slide a lot of detail on it, but for the most part, like the library, Niagara South, the committees as proposed in this budget aren't going up a significant amount, although I do have another slide just to talk about the library, because I know there was a budget report with respect to the library. But the museum, they did submit a report to council, I think it was 2023-180, and they were asking to take some staff members to full-time. And I'll just, I know there was some confusion, and we ended up, I guess, deferring those reports to the next council meeting. So ultimately what happened is in the last year's budget with the museum, they had a number of employees that went on a one-year contract to try out as full-time. And I think that was quite successful, and I think our director of the museum and cultural services there was basically pointing out in that report that in order to maintain the service level and to maintain Roselawn, we need to make them permanent. Now, what ultimately needs to happen to do that is we need to move them onto our salary grid, and then there's benefits, etc. So in doing that, it would be in the budget. So staff, when building this 2.9 blended increase, have included that ask in here. So if we get to Tuesday night and council was not to approve that, we would reduce this budget ask, but it is included here right now, what they're asked. On the next slide, I'll tell you that with respect to the library, I understand that the discussion with the library, staff have met with the library board. We understand that even since we publicized this, I think the city that they were looking to do the shared service program with has, I think, indicated that maybe this isn't the time for the shared service, but staff are working with the library board on other options to be able to move forward. So we haven't budgeted for it right now, but we are working with the library and the library board to look at other options to make sure that their need of having additional coverage specifically for their CEO is met. I know Councillor Bagu's a member of that too. I don't know if he has anything to say on it, but anyways, those are my comments really on the boards and committees. Net, there's not a huge increase, but the museum and library is kind of the move, the larger increase, and it's just a function of moving people from the pilot of full-time on contract to full-time, and the benefits that come with that.
Okay. Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor. Here's the concern I have with the any staff increase in departments is on the surface, expanding a new entity and growing it like Roselawn and the success of it seems eminently reasonable that it's going to need more resources. But when it's combined with another entity, whether it be the museum or on the library who wants to do things, what I don't know in the equation, because I'm not on the library board, is it been looked at that, does the museum or the library have more than a community of 20,000 has? And so sometimes over time you get very efficient at one thing, and so when you add something like Roselawn and you need a person, if efficiencies have been garnered, or you're already in the scheme of comparators overstaffed there, and I'm not suggesting they are, then the logical move is to say, well, you move one person over to here, your complement's the same, you've gotten efficient, you're way more employees than another community. I'm not suggesting that is the case because I don't know, but what I am suggesting is when we're adding people in a combined department, it seems to me to make sense to review the existing status quo and if there's any ways of shuffling people. Now, one would expect the manager and director to do that, but I think everybody we've learned is at a different level of how they see their role, maybe as managers or administrators. One may be just all about increasing programming, et cetera, and maybe not so strong on efficiency. So to just say that we switch somebody from a contract to full-time, I would like to see the backstory, and to me, that should be at a council meeting, and then if passed is then put forward in the budget, and you say, as we recommended in report 220, this is just confirmation of that change, and that's why it's here. And I don't know that I'm satisfied that that's happened. Again, I'm not against it on the surface, but I think I'd like to see more meat or background data.
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council. So this is where being a treasurer is always complicated, because there's asks, and there's asks that you need to meet the corporate values and the pay compensation and that. So this budget includes it. And when we go to council on Tuesday, where you actually do the final approval, that report is actually going to be on council, where our manager, I think I forget, I apologize to Stephanie at her exact title, but will be here and will be able to answer questions to council. And then if council finds that they're appropriate, council can leave it in the budget and move forward. If council decides that there's more information need, council can then make the decision to either remove it or leave it, and then just request for more information. So There is a lot of flexibility of council tonight because you will have a chance to have that conversation on Tuesday unless she's available via Teams tonight, and I'm not sure if she is.
Yeah, okay. Stephanie, can you bring her in?
Oh, yeah, take presentation down.
Good evening. I just need my video supported, so I'm allowed to join you here. Can you hear me?
We're having a hard time hearing you. We can hear you, but faintly.
All right, let me just increase my volume here. I've never had a hard time being quiet, so sorry you can't see my visual. It's just not allowing me to share my video at this time. But I do appreciate Councillor Bruno's comments regarding efficiency and thoughtfulness, and I can let you know that, well,
Stephanie?
Might have to start over.
Stephanie, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, you were on mute temporarily. If you could just start from the beginning, we could hear you clearly now, and sorry about that.
Absolutely. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I got a little case of the COVID, so I'm just recovering and keeping safe here at home, but happy to join you virtually. What I was trying to say was that through the last year and a half, both the finance chair, the chairman of the board, the CAO, and myself, as well as HR, have taken quite a thoughtful look at how to build slowly and securely the Department of Museum and Culture. And to be quite honest, the recommendation that I had originally gone forward was to add a full-time position to my request for 2023, being a manager of culture that would then assist with managing Roselawn Center. But through really trying to build the best, most thoughtful planning, we feel that the request that's in front of you is something that we can manage to do at least for 2024, and using a lot of our volunteers, using grants to supplement with students as well as projects. We feel that this staff contingent will go forward. There was some early studies done that I don't think we have shared with the board yet, just on our department versus other communities with other staff and their departments. And this is in keeping with recommendations from outside consultants. So maybe the CAO or the treasurer can recommend if that's a good time to maybe bring that forward. But I'd be happy to address this in person on Tuesday if you would like to have more specifics.
Councilor Bruno?
Yes, thank you very much, Stephanie. I guess from my point of view, if you didn't catch it, I'm not opposed to your need for more resources for Roselawn, because we can't make you director of a bigger entity, expect interfacing and all of that good stuff without more resources. So although the request is about Roselawn, my question is, I really don't know if the resources you already have, I'll say human resources, is under or overstated for the museum itself as we've grown that complement of employees, because I don't have a benchmark against other like-sized communities, or more importantly, the things you're trying to do versus others on the base load of the museum. And so my query was really about, if the complement be moved around to fulfill the new need
Ah.
at Roseland. Sorry if I didn't explain that, right?
I understood through the deputy mayor to Councillor Bruno. That is already happening. So myself, I had a shift at the archives last week. We had our public programmer Sloan, who works out of both buildings. She was on the reception at Roselawn. So we are essentially working at the museum, the archives, and Roselawn, rotating through, and we do a little bit of job sharing. But in terms of efficiency, I can't think of anything more efficient than we can all do each other's jobs in a pinch for, if there's a program or if there's an event. We are all helping each other out at the museum, as well as Arabella's tea room when they need it.
I'm just wondering, not to belabor this, perhaps offline between now and Tuesday night, I can discuss with you and Mr. Bowles that whole comparator on museum and complement. And I think that could probably resolve my question better than trying to work it out tonight.
That sounds like a good way moving forward. Does anyone else have questions for me while I'm here?
Anyone have any questions for Stephanie? Looks like you did a great job. No further questions.
Sorry for those technical difficulties, and I do thank you for indulging my illness tonight.
Thank you for coming online. I believe Councillor, who was it that had the last question? Was it? Yeah. Do you have any further questions? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Director Bowles, if you could proceed, please.
Sure. I think our next slide is just to talk about the departments. When you look at the departments, I identified the net of all the departments increasing is about $285,000, which is just over 1% year-over-year increase. That really happened because we did a number of organizational changes to help offset the costs. And in fact, almost all of the cost increase in the departments really relates back to whether it be the tree canopy program that we put forward to council, or whether it be to some of the line painting and snow plowing. And we noted those on the highlight page earlier, which I asked council to save their, I guess, questions if they had any. And I don't know if there's any questions on the cost to starting the process to move from 32% to 40% on the tree canopy. But the greater detail of each of these costs was related to public works that's driving it with respect to the canopy, roads, and parks costs are in Appendix E and F of your budget, and it's the same E and F that's printed on the website in case anybody's watching and wants to read them.
Councillor Bruno and then Councillor Bayview.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. I had one question on the tree canopy thing. So my concern is that we take care of what's there before necessarily expanding. So while I think tree canopy is a multitude of trees out there, there are also the existing tree canopy, which could be as small as what's in front of your house. And so my real worry is, at least through the years, when I've had a constituent ask about a tree being removed, or in one of the subdivisions in my ward, there's an ongoing program of having to remove them because the trees that went in at the beginning were wrong. I want to spend money on growing that, but I know that there's been times when the Public Works has said, no, we've used up the tree cutting, tree trimming budget, and I don't have any more money, and I'll have to wait till next year. So I guess what I'd like to see is maintaining or pruning what we have is fully funded before putting new funding for more trees in, because there used to be a waiting list. So I don't know if that's more of a question for the director.
Sorry, Director Schapowski?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Bruno. What we're doing right now is we're asking for the $200,000, which will be strictly for tree growth within private property. For grant programs, it'll be for the right-of-ways, it'll be for municipal parks, municipal properties, all to try and grow that urban canopy. In regards to the maintenance that we have, as of this year right now, it's approximately $180,000 that we spend on maintenance for trees within our right-of-ways and municipal properties. And we are coming to a point where we're taking care of a lot of the older issues from diseases that have happened in the past. We're actually catching up on a lot of our park trees and elevating all of the canopies on the trees. We're getting to a good point right now. We're getting to a point where we have a quick turnaround. Usually most of the work's being completed within the first year. A lot of other municipalities can't say that. They have multi-year programs, and they do move from 2 to 3 years even in some cases. So we are at a point where we're at pretty good on our maintenance program. The part now is really growing that tree canopy and establishing a treed street line and property use too. So
Go ahead.
Maybe just to be a little more granular. So right now, if a counselor here calls and says there's 3 trees on these 3 streets and it's November, is there a waiting list, or is there a problem with that request being fulfilled because the contractors used up what you allocated this year?
Through you, Your Worship. So there would be an inspection that takes place first, and it'd be determined if it needs to come down or not. If it does need to come down, it will come down. It'll probably be about 30 to 45 day turnaround right now, but it is dependent upon if the tree needs to come down first, because we're always trying to keep as many trees as we possibly can, and we're not going to take them down without good reason for it. And there are the possibility that we may be able to trim the tree to resolve some kind of issue. So it would be on a as inspected basis is typically how we would run with it. But if there is a tree that's posing a hazard to the public, there without doubt would it would be taken down.
So just,
go ahead.
yeah.
Just through the acting mayor to Councillor Bruno, just more of a qualitative answer than quantitative, and more, what's the word, anecdotal. I can tell you that in my conversations with the public, and not being a person who works 8 hours a day in public works, but being a person who deals with taxpayers directly and council members, I've spoken to council members and members of the public who are very impressed with our response times, and even the fact, and I have heard a council member say to me, you know, when I dealt with insert name of an employee from 10 years ago here, it was always too late in the year, I can't do it, there's no budget left, but now they're finding a way to make it happen, whether it's tree trimming, emergency response, or even just, and I can see Curtis nodding his head, an inspection and ensuring that a tree is vital or is in need of removal, and then actually taking place. So at least anecdotally, I can tell you that I think it's been better than ever.
Just on that, Steve, have you added to the tree trimming budget this year normally? Yeah.
Director Bull?
He gave it to you, so.
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, our tree maintenance, plant maintenance budget has gone up from the 280 to 250 in this budget. So it actually went up significantly, and that came out of the preliminary work of the urban forest plan. That I know it's chicken and egg.
No,
it's
understand why.
coming to council really as the public works finishes it, but we already know from the consultants that's what your future run rate's going to be. So we've increased it to match it so you can plant trees and maintain the trees with this budget going forward.
Great, that's satisfactory to me. Thank you.
Councillor Baygu, is your question on the tree initiative? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I think I was going to do something else, eh? I heard Director mention about tree grants. So this is where the money where people buy a species that's native can apply to the city for the grant for the $50 or whatever it is off the price of the tree. So it comes out of this amount of money?
So we would use some of this money to be able to go through different incentives that Public Works would have to try to promote growth on private property. It could be something from, you know, talking to our school boards and going out and planting some trees on school properties, or it could be encouraging students or parents to be able to take trees back to their homes and plant them. So most of the money is going to go towards planting the right-of-ways, municipal properties, but we do want to get the public involved because we realize that the private property is a part of the urban canopy, and we do need to encourage it to be planted as well. So it'd be more on an incentive or public promotion basis for that particular budget.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Through you, I know the city is pushing for native species plantings rather than some of these other trees, and I know also we have some suspected oak disease within the community that just arisen, and thank you for taking care of that and looking after that one, and that may be a bigger problem later on. I don't know, but boulevard trees, I know that's been kicked around the Environmental Advisory Committee and staff. Are we going to conclude this discussion?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. So we are completing an urban forest management plan right now. When we do bring that back to council to bring the full report back in presentation, what we're planning to do is look at the bylaw at the same time too and have that amended. Staff are of the opinion that we would promote having trees within the boulevards.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Okay. Just on the topic of the tree canopy, so a lot of the discussion is having a lot of these trees be introduced onto the right-of-ways, like on the boulevards. One way I'm surprised we didn't have this already in place, was through conditions of consent, where you can have the developer or you have a fund set aside for these street trees, which it doesn't have to necessarily go in front of the person who does the application or apply for it, but it can go anywhere on the municipal boulevards. So I wonder maybe in the future if that's something that we want to do. I understand we have an official plan that's going to be looked at where we can maybe put those sort of options forward so that we can increase our tree canopy without it necessarily costing taxpayer money. So I don't know. Director Bowles, if you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. So as we move forward in the presentation, we're going to talk about some of the self-sustaining entities as well as some of the user fees. Just for full clarity, there is a separate report to approve the user fees, but if I don't talk about the user fees during the budget, it's also kind of hard to know what you're approving in the budget. So I've included these slides about some user fees. I think the big point to note is we've been using the fee structure, the framework that we talked to council about, but we have a lot of fees, and I'll show you a slide of the ones we've gone over in detail so far, and then we're going to continue going through the other fees going into the new year with respect to that new framework. We do have I guess from a structural standpoint, we do have a couple areas of fees that will have to come back in 2024. I think I already mentioned at this budget meeting that we'll bring back planning and building. There has some, within those departments and within legislation, will require some changes. As we talk about the beach fees going forward, we are proposing the fees, but staff are looking at some additional adjustments, maybe an hourly type of fee that council might want to consider in the new year, but we're still doing some of that review, so that could be added as in the new year before the beach year. So I did provide this summary kind of with each of the categories of fees where we have comments. We'll talk about the health and wellness fees, the cemetery fees tonight. We've already approved the marina. I noted planning and development will come early new year, and we'll talk about some of the beach fees. Now, if you take the ones that I've just mentioned, that probably makes up like 90% of all the fees that we collect within the city. So while there is some opening spots that we still have to go through and do the full review versus our framework, we've done the vast majority of this to see what's fully cost recovery and not. So I think for intensive purposes, what we're going to have to do is I'll do the arena, and then I'll stop because there might be specific questions with respect to the marina, and then I'll go on to the cemetery. So the arena, total fees collected in the arena are about $500,000. The arena operations, I just want to point out to council, and I'll read some of the comments on this slide, are we are exploring being able to open, depending on staffing adjustments, much earlier, because right now when we open at 6:30, it kind of means 6:30 to 7:30, 7:30 to 8:30. Well, depending on when school goes, you can't necessarily get 2 ice rentals. So if users want a second ice rental, we are going to look at maybe adjusting when we open, so that way we can accommodate another ice rental, given that we have the facility there. Rental classifications, we have looked at the non-resident. We've been trying to work that in. We are recommending that we do adjust that to a non-Niagara resident, i.e. for people that might be from the States, etc. We have looked at our user ability or our access within the system. And remember that we took a policy to council and council approved it. We put all of Port Colborne users first. So we're putting the Wave, we're putting Port Colborne Minor Hockey. They get to choose first, and then when everybody else chooses, we're still averaging, not including school time, around 40 hours of open ice every week. So there's still a lot of ice that people can rent. And for that reason, we are recommending that we leave it and we let anybody within Niagara come and use the normal rate, because the absence of that likely is going to reduce the amount of revenue that we're going to get within the facility. Once we get, and if we were to get to full capacity, then we would use potentially looking more aggressively at a non-resident rate. But for now, we'd recommend that council look at, instead of a non-resident rate, kind of a non-Niagara resident rate. We've also recommended in this user fee to expand the non-prime time. It used to be, I think, from 4 till 10, and we'd like to do 4 till 9 to really encourage those groups at the 9 to 11 to really take advantage, because we oftentimes have openings at that time. I guess the other item that we've also introduced is, and we'd like to introduce with council's approval, is last minute ice. So on a given day, if there's ice and it's posted on the board that it's available, people could come in, walk in, and rent the ice at a discount. And we'd like to open that, and some municipalities do that and have been successful. We do find that right now we have this training rate that you're able to use kind of, if you have 1-2 people on the ice, it's supposed to be, but sometimes it's as much as 5 that go onto the ice, and it's about half the price. Our recommendation is we maintain a training rate when you have a trainer and 1 or 2 people on the ice, but you can only do that during non-prime times, because right now they can do it during prime times. Another thing, when we look at other municipalities, we would recommend getting rid of the youth and adult nomenclature, and we would go to just it's prime or non-prime. And when it comes to youth sports, we move this towards anybody that's affiliated with minor sports organizations. So if you're a minor sports organization, there's no change. But we do have some unique situations on the ice where you might have like 8 or 9 people playing and one is a youth, so then that group wants the youth rate. And we think it would be a lot easier, specifically as we look forward to the future, where we'd like to look at technology that people could book an ice rental and then just come, like right online. And it's going to be very hard to be able to adjudicate youth and non-youth when you don't have somebody there. So just having it simple, that it was prime and non-prime, which we see at most other municipalities, will make that transaction that much easier. We did try to, instead of having multiple different for Catholic and public and physical education, we tried to group them all into the same grouping, and we don't really think that's going to have an impact on their budgets. So when we go through all of that, we also identified that all fees when it comes to the arena are also plus the insurance fee. So it wasn't always clear on our user fee bylaw, but we want to make that very clear now, that it's the fee you see there, unless you're with a hockey program or a figure skating program or a speed skating program that's associated with a higher organization that has insurance coverage that we maintain or they provide to us, you will have to pay for that. I think it was always understood, but because it wasn't clear in our fees, I don't know if it was always charged, and that's what we found when we've done some work. So we just want to make it very clear to council about that. So then how that kind of works out is this is trying to compare kind of last year to this year, how it would work. We're not really looking at significant fee increases. What we've really tried to do, like we've done before, is tie to averages. We've tried to set our fees based on the averages of other rinks within the Niagara region, and that's how we've moved forward and established or proposed them going forward here. There is a separate rate for the Junior B hockey games. It's kind of in between kind of the old adult or the prime time and the non-prime and the old youth, but that's just consistent to how we've had it with them and how their agreement when they came here. So we've maintained that. I know that's a lot. I know we're trying to change around, but our main goal is we want to be able to make it so it's very clean. When you go on a website, you can see it, you know where you stand, and then if you want to buy it online, you can buy it and come. If there's any questions.
We have Councillor Bruno.
Thank you. Love this simplification, making it clearer for the public. Just one question. This opening at 5 a.m. or 5:30 with rentals at 5:30, so does that extend the hours for the need for a staff member to be there?
Yeah, through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, it would. That's what we're not going to actually schedule it to open until we need it to open. Because if we're going to sell the ice, it will cover the cost of having a staff member there. And if there is an overtime requirement or not, we can work through that. But we aren't going to just be open just because. We're not going to open if it's empty ice. It's just, we wanted to make council aware that it would be our preference to, because it's always been known it opened at 6:30, right? Like that's basically when ice was, or at least it has been in recent years. But we wanted council to be aware that we would be willing to work with our staff that are on to open earlier should people want to try to take advantage of non-prime rates.
So this confuses me, because if I book the ice the day before, you're going to have to turn around and get a staff member to come in earlier?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor, we won't open that to just book online. Like as we look out another year from now, by the time we get that technology there, we won't just let somebody pick that. That time frame will have to be worked out. It would most likely be with organizations that are constant users that might want, for whatever reason, they want to try to avoid the prime. Well, maybe it's a fee thing. They want to avoid the prime time, and it just creates more opportunity to be able to hit the rink. And we would book that in advance directly on the phone with our ice booker.
So just to clarify, so this rate takes effect in the fall of this program takes effect in the skating season starting like this September?
Yeah, so through the deputy mayor to the councillor, I
Next
appreciate
September, I should say.
Question. So last year we did the rate changes May 1st because there was one rink and it was very easy. But we think because we have a change in how we're explaining the rates and people are trying to book next year and then they're trying to book, we already have people asking for this time next year now of rates or of ice. So our viewpoint was we do it as of January 1, but because we know all of our main users already sign a contract with us for the rest of the year, if they sign the contract in December at the old rates, they'll get the old rate. But if they are, as of January 1, if you sign a contract after that, you're going to be under the new rate. And the new rate is, for all intents and purposes, very close to the old rate. There's no significant real changes on it. It's just, it's not about the rate change, it's more about the structure, to change the nomenclature, to get people, when we're at our busiest in January, February, March, getting used to the new categories so that way we can help them book for the summer. We can help them book for the fall.
So just finally then, that opening early, pre-scheduled, the overtime rate for probably a minimum of 2 people is going to be more than covered by this rate in non-prime time at 5:30 a.m.
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor, depending on the size and the individual, it may be one person that is opening. It may be 2. We'll have to work through it. If it is 2, the wage may be slightly above, depending on the type of user group that's using it. If it is 1, it definitely will cover it. Our expectation is there's not going to be a huge uptake. We just want to put it on the table to start having the conversation, and then we can see about longer term, should we adjust schedules? Because once we adjust schedules, there's no overtime requirements, et cetera. But we just want to really be able to market it to see if there's an interest.
Great. Thank you.
Councillor Hoyle?
Through the deputy mayor to Mr. Bowles, I'm glad to see that you point out that local programs, school associations that are your main purchasers of ice will get first grabs at it. Will that schedule be adjusted to be earlier, since you're already saying that people want the same time for a year in advance that are now picking up ice? And the other thing I'm just clarifying is that these new rates, since it's now Niagara based, so we're subsidizing everyone, basically, because if local gets, I don't know, I'll just say 148, then I don't know, Niagara Falls comes in and buys ice, they're 148 too. So I'm just clarifying for people out there who are going to ask me probably this weekend.
Sure.
Councillor, Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, I guess on the subsidy, I guess because we have about 50 hours or 40 hours on a given week of open ice, I guess if we don't sell it, taxpayers are subsidizing it. So the reality is, I don't know, I appreciate how it was worded and how you asked the question, but I think we want to bring the cost of the taxpayer down the most. So our goal is to have a rate that we can sell the ice at. And when we talk to other municipalities and other organizations that are looking, they're looking to pay these rates that we put on the sheet. So our ultimate goal is to sell the ice at these rates, and that will actually bring down the total subsidy versus selling it at a rate that we don't think we can sell, and then they're not going to come, and then we're just going to have to subsidize even more. I don't know if that helps on that one at all. But your second question, or your first question, I think really referred to the timing. We might get requests, but we will never book somebody that is, before we talk to Port Colborne Minor Hockey, the Wave, the Sailors, all the locals get the first dibs. That's what council's approved policy is, and that's where it's going to go. But I can say I was in the health center today, and we do have a unique request from figure skating, speed skating group that would like to come and use our facility more often. So we're probably going to reach out to our local user groups, because their request would interfere with one of the local user groups by half an hour. So we're going to call and see, like, how does that work? Could you help work with us that? But if they could, then there's a lot of ice that the speed skating group could buy. So we're already going to start having the conversations for next year now in that situation.
Councillor Hoyle, do you have any more?
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. That kind of like, it's going to help me out on the weekend.
Sure, thanks.
Councillor Dan?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Brian, why the funny numbers? I mean, 146.90, we're going to raise it to 148.28. Why isn't it $149 or $150? I mean, we don't have a double zero on the end of anything. I'm just trying to do a little calculation here. Your increase isn't 8%, it's not 9%. I just, like, why the funny numbers? I'm just kind of questioning that as my retail experience.
Director Bowles?
Yeah, so through the deputy mayor to the council, I appreciate that it actually is we can round it, and council can say round it. We can definitely do that. We literally took the 12 municipalities, and it was a calculation to come up with the average. And we told council that last year that we would move towards the average, so we calculated the average. But we could rotate it. It's a good point. We could rotate it. Now, just remember that even if you tried to go to an even number, as soon as you add HST onto it, it'll change. And then as soon as you add the insurance cost onto it, it'll change again. So we'll never actually end up at an even number because not even everybody has to pay for the insurance, because some people end up already having insurance, like poor Colborne Minor Hockey already has their insurance. So
If you take the amount that you have and you divide it by 113, that would take you back before tax. So you could still make the amount work out to a couple zeros or a 50-cent type of thing. I just find these numbers like kind of weird.
To the deputy mayor, I don't disagree. And when you look at other municipalities, everybody has it off a bit, but we're happy to take direction to round it up or down to a zero. That's no problem. The clerk can maybe help me with that. She's if that's something that council would like us to do.
Okay, if it's okay with council, I think you can take that as staff direction.
That's fantastic.
As council direction. Any other questions from council? I don't see any. Director Bowles, you can continue on.
Okay. This next user fee, I know we talked a lot about last year, and council asked us to come to get some more information, and our manager of financial services did a lot of review. There's a lot of numbers here. We can talk at a high level. There's two sheets. If we look at the screens, there's the resident rate and the non-resident rate. I'm going to start with the non-resident rate. The non-resident rate, which is the second slide, that's when you get to the 2024 numbers, that's full cost accounting. That's when we calculate all the costs in, that's what the rate should be if we want to recover every single cost. And when you look at the comparators, which are the same on both of the slides, what we found is at different municipalities, they might have like 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 different options. So what we did was we took the different options and we created averages, because I think one of the problems that we had comparing people last year is the comparative data that was done by the consultant might have taken just the lowest option that we were comparing against. We weren't comparing against all of the options that different municipalities had. Other things just to point out with these fees, so the 2022 and 23 are the actual fees that we approved in the bylaw. The 23 proposed is what staff was originally proposing last year, but we didn't move forward because we kept them at the 2022 rate. And the 2024, again, on the non-resident, those are the fees that are full cost accounting. That would recover all the costs. And I think the biggest question council had last year, and we reiterate, is because we're such a small cemetery operations with about 20 or so burials a year, we don't actually plan for that work. So almost all of that work, when it happens, whether we end up, well, not we, but the individuals end up having to dig a grave site or prepare it on a Thursday or a Wednesday for the next day or on the weekend. In almost every situation, it ends up causing overtime for somebody, because we have to pull somebody off on a job that they were already planned to do that day, because we end up sending somebody else, because we don't normally know, we don't plan for X number of burials, again, because there are so few burials. So we basically try to do a blended of trying to look at what the full cost would be, because in almost every scenario, we end up having to do it on overtime, the actual work. Because just to be clear, if it's not the individual doing the overtime, somebody else that had to cover their shift is on overtime to cover their shift to do it. And that's kind of where we ended up doing our full cost accounting on. I'm sure there's some questions, a lot of fees there. I know you've had a chance to look at them, but resident is, non-resident is full cost, and then the resident, you can see we tried to go to averages or no higher than the next highest comparator, which was a municipality near us. I don't know if there's any questions.
Councillor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. This is, I'm glad we did the capital budget first. Because we just approved $100,000 a year, I believe, to right-size some of the deficiencies that were involved in stones being overturned or disrupted with frost, all those things. So my first question is, that 100,000 that we spent for that aspect of cemetery work, it's in the capital budget, so that expires after this year, and then you're into a new one. So how much of a deficit are we in that we're having to spend that capital money, which either wasn't being spent, enough of it, or now there's a buildup that now we have to pay the piper. Like, how long is that unfulfilled money that if we charged the proper fee 30 years ago, how long does that new 100,000 have to still be expended before we're back to sort of even?
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the council and council. First, if I can just add, so that capital budget, the funding for it is directly on the levy. None of that 100,000 that we're putting aside to do any capital work at the current cemeteries is funded by any of these fees, because the people that are buying a plot today or going in a plot, they can't fund the stuff of the people that came beforehand. So only, I guess, the living can pay the stuff that came beforehand. The Director of Public Works and I were working on some stats, and I delayed it long enough that I would give him an extra minute. But I believe that we were having the conversation, the data that he had, that we were going to be, if we did 100,000, we were going to be almost 10 years before we could get to and get all of the deficiencies of headstones and all of that corrected. And he can correct me if he'd like.
Director Shkowski?
Yeah, through your worship. So there are a number of items at a number of the cemeteries that the municipality owns. There's cleanup and general grounds work. There's fencing that needs to be replaced. There's going to be storage sheds or compounds that need to be reconstructed, especially at the Overholt Cemetery, where there's sheds that are basically falling down right now, new material to be purchased. And then the headstones themselves, there are a number of headstones that still need to be repaired, so that alone will cost a significant amount too, just to start catching up on that aspect of it. So that's what staff's plan is, to basically try to hit that as hard as we can, deal with the worst headstones that we have, and then create that program to keep going on an annual basis to start catching up.
Purposefully, because you're right, we can't change the past, and we have to make up for not having charged enough. And while it's great to have other municipalities listed here for what they charge, I think that we just spent $100,000 for the next 10 years to remedy not charging enough, so that there's headstone money as part of perpetual care. And so it's my understanding that there's really only about, is it 10 internments or 10 sales? You're like, what is the number of actual plot sales or internments?
Director
Your
Shkowski?
worship, there's approximately 20 to 25 interments that take place on an annual basis right now.
And so obviously some of those are in existing purchased graves with the second person in, or they're on top, right, if it's cremation. So I just feel fundamentally it's our job to not make the same mistake twice or correct the wrong. So I'm not so sure why going forward we're going to continue on a basis of not paying full cost recovery. Because we're then not fixing the problem, we're just adding to it, and we're taking the money out of another pot to make this right. So it seems to me with that few a number, that we shouldn't be adding to what's been an age-old problem in charging full cost recovery. So I guess I'm wondering, is the reason for it not going to full cost recovery because it seems to be a leap too far?
Director Bowles?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, staff was trying to interpret, I think, some of the discussion that happened last year at budget, and I think there was, one of the comments was to have a residence and non-residence rate, and finding the right, and maybe addressing that, how you get there ultimately, because that was I think one of the concerns is the jump between the current rate and full cost recovery was a very big jump, and I think that's what staff was interpreting from council and trying to find a medium solution. That's where, when we came up with these rates this year, we looked at the surrounding municipalities and we identified and set a rate that we were, for the local residents, that we were seeing as kind of the highest of one of the local municipalities, and that's what we anchored our recommendation on. And from staff's perspective, I think we were trying to find that balance between getting from point A to point B, but ultimately it remains staff's recommendation that costs like this go to full cost recovery, and our CAO always has a good respect to it, that if you don't, a good comment on this, if we don't charge full cost recovery on fees that are traditionally full cost recovery, it just means that taxpayers have to subsidize it. And that's, I think, what you're talking about.
I guess just finally, when I look at the number of 25, and some of them aren't buying a new grave, and some of them are the lower priced way things are going in the future, which is ashes going on top or in 3 feet or something, and it's not a full grave site, that really the number 25 may be 12, which may be 4 that are buying a new plot. And so this is such a low number, and it is obviously a once-in-a-lifetime purchase at the end of life, and whether there's, your CPP or your estate or the family, and obviously there's some that don't work in other categories. I just would like to right-size something that we don't have to go back and look at it, and for the small number of people it is, and whether you're purchasing a new plot, you have hopefully a window out there for you to buy that plot. Why not just make it right in the first place? Because the other thing you're exacerbating is that somebody who buys a plot today at this price, it costs a different price when the person goes into the ground. And so if you're not ever charging the right price at the front end, you're only compounding the future deficit of this. And I'm just for full cost recovery on this one-time low amount of people doing it, and then you don't have to revisit it. And I'm not so sure it has anything to do with what another community costs. I don't know if there's people that cemetery shop or not. But I think, again, if there is, that's also a tiny number. So I would just like to look forward full cost recovery.
Just on that, what's the role of perpetual care in that? So if we don't do full cost recovery, isn't there the fact that there's a perpetual care fund, would that not pick up some of the slack? Whereas in the past there wasn't that, and that's why we're spending so much money?
It's a great question. Actually, my next slide has a summary of some of the self-sustaining entities. And if we were to go with the fees that we have here, I think our contribution from selling cemetery plots, except because you're getting reimbursed for the land, would produce about $70,000. That would be going back to the parks. And that would offset the operating costs. So the actual operating costs to maintain our current cemeteries is about $200,000 a year. And that perpetual fund that you make reference to, because the cemeteries that we were given didn't have perpetual funds, there's only $400,000 there. So because you have to maintain the fund to keep up with inflation and that, we only get about $4,000 a year from it. So like that fund, like I guess if we do the math, needs to be like $10 million, not 400,000, right? So because we were never given a perpetual fund and we don't have one, the levy not only is picking up the $100,000 to fix it for capital, it's also spending $200,000 a year to maintain the current ones. And that's where, if we don't eventually get to full cost recovery on these, everybody else that goes into a cemetery, it's just a future generation that's going to have to pay for them as well. By going to full cost recovery, I know it's a leap, and whether we get there this year, we get there over time, it prevents a future tax pressure down the road, especially as we have to take on new cemeteries, as the Director of Public Works has made us known about.
Councillor Bayview?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. One of the reasons I've talked to a few people in the business, not in the business of killing people, but taking care of the deceased, and what's happening nowadays quite a bit is it's getting too expensive to bury people in ashes. Even to bury ashes is getting too expensive. There's so many relatives in people's closets or wherever, basements or garages, because they just can't afford it. The federal government, when somebody passes away, I think it's a $2,500 I guess donation or whatever, CPP, whatever. But that hasn't gone up in how many years, Mr. Deputy Mayor? And with these fees here for residents, it's people are going to think like, what do I do with the $2,500? Do I bury his ashes, or just put them in a garage and go do something else with the money? I have no problem with the fees as they sit here, Mr. Deputy Mayor, but full cost recovery, I do agree with, but let's give some people a chance to purchase a grave site for a year or so and then put it up to full cost recovery, because of the cost involved is quite a bit with the economy, the interest rates. Right now, people don't have the extra money to buy grave sites off the city because they got to feed their families and everything else there. But there may be a few that we could take care of, Mr. Mayor or Deputy Mayor, and I feel this is good enough for this year, for 2024, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Begg. Okay. I'll go Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to Brian and I guess to staff. What happens when we don't come close to recapturing funds, for lack of a better term, and we're just on the hook for maintaining the cemeteries with next to zero revenue? Because like Councillor Bagu said, more and more people are being cremated, and there may come a time when 25 might be reduced to 5. So what's a plan to have any resources available to maintain the cemeteries when people may not be buying plots ever? I mean, we have to realize that that may be gonna happen in the future. What do we do?
Director Bowles?
Through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor and Council, I think there's almost two parts to that question. One is, if you don't charge or get to eventually full cost recovery, you're just going to create even more pressure on the levy down the road. So it is the argument, whether it's today or tomorrow, getting to it is a good idea, because this isn't, I don't think this is the same as the hockey ice where at some point in time somebody's just not going to buy it. They might not buy it for lots of reasons, as Councillor Bagu pointed out. So right now we'll, provided that, you know, people, as Councillor Bagu said, don't get buried anymore or cremated, etc., will be like we are today, responsible for the 200,000, responsible for the 100, and realistically, and I think council's already addressed this, responsible for even more, because there are more cemeteries that we may end up with over time. So this is going to become potentially a significant line item in the city's budget, and that's where staff are advocating, whether it be today or tomorrow, but moving towards full cost recovery, because if you're going in, we don't want to create any more cost down the road than we already have.
And just on that, I'm not, don't want to get too into this subject, but if there's going to be a lot of cremations, not a whole lot of burials, there's the option of a crematorium, which could potentially help in that cost recovery. So just a thought on that. Go to Councillor Bodner and then Councillor Bruno.
Okay, so I guess, how do we resolve this? Would somebody make a motion and then we either go forward or defeat it? Is that the going forward?
We'll when we get to the motion, a councillor can bring a motion to amend, and then we can have that vote at that time.
Okay.
Councillor Bruno?
From what I understand, not from the public cemetery, but the horse has already left the gate on cremations. All you have to do is read the obits, and cremation going in a family plot now on top is actually a way that it may not be the prime reason, but it also reduces the cost of burial, and not a new stone, maybe just a new name. So I think that, I mean, that's long since passed. Ask a funeral director, right? Ask how many interments, right, are ashes versus full interment. So I think that is already passed. But I guess maybe a little bit to Councillor Bagu's point, if these rates go up January 1st and people want to buy a future plot, there's a couple months now to do it, or we could make it, you know, in June of 2022, or you could do that for people who are looking forward and have the funds now and do it. I think we also have to remember that, you know, if there were 25 internments, right, how many of those people either do prepay, right, that are going on, they're an interment, but they've already bought the plot. That's A. B is there's a whole percentage of people whose estate did have the money to pay full pop, but we're not charging them full pop. So I think when you get down to, you know, the needy, you probably just need to go to a funeral director and say, how many people do they have to take care of through the region, right, that pays for that, folks that don't have enough money. I think there's still the small end of the 25 that we inter. So if we did, so I'd like to move that, to Councillor Bodner's point, that we go to full cost recovery being January 1st, but if somebody wants to amend that or not, or it gets voted down, I'd like to just put it on the floor.
We're going to have that go to the end when we do the motion.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. So when we vote on the motion, if you want to bring this amendment forward, we can have that vote.
To the deputy mayor and the clerk, just on that, just remember, because we make things complicated, it's the second report I think he makes that motion on, not the first report. Yeah, thank you.
I don't see any other questions. I have a question regarding, so you talked about employees and how we don't have any employees directly for the cemetery because there's such low internments. Do we know what the expected rate of increase of internments to go on? Like, it's no secret we do have an aging population for Colborne, and I would assume that it's going to increase. And what do other municipalities our size that have the same situation? Do they have any employees or that deal directly with the cemetery?
Yep, through you, Your Worship. We currently, right now, due to the low volume, we do end up using our roads and park staff to be able to complete those interments. That is the plan for the foreseeable future at this point right now, just because we can't justify having full-time crew that would be there. We do treat it as part of our grass cutting program, so along with our parks, our roadsides, the cemeteries are also cut. Along with our parks, there is maintenance on trees and general litter pickup and garbage as a typical park would have. So right now we're kind of in the mix of having it involved in our overall operations as a whole. We are going to start looking at utilizing columbariums for interments for ashes, as council's already alluded to. That seems to be the going way nowadays. So we will be looking at that to try to accommodate the next generation and how things are evolving. There could be a time, we know some other municipalities, they do very similar and they're actually busier than us and have more cemeteries to manage. So they do use typically roads or park staff for those operations. If you get into something that's very, very significant, and we do end up taking on a number of other cemeteries that are active, it's something we're going to have to consider at that time. But until that time comes, I think the best method to operate those facilities are to have our roads and park staff man them.
Okay, thank you. Great, Director Bowles, if you'd like to proceed.
So just to talk a little bit about the self-sustaining entities, as mentioned, the building department, the budget, and kind of council's had a chance to look at the budget, is balanced, but we are going to have to come back and adjust the fees because we have adjusted the staffing complement, and we have to match the staffing complement with respect to the speed, because while there's a lot of plans for building, the building has to happen, so we have to match all of that at the same time. The marina budget, when you look at the details of the marina budget, you'll see that there's a $51,000 transfer to the capital budget. We have a new manager of recreation, so we're giving the manager of recreation some time to work with our supervisor of the marina to put together a capital budget, and they'll come back early in the new year and talk to council about capital needs at the marina. Obviously, dredging is the number one issue. We continue to work with the MECP with respect to getting the approval to dredge. Hoping that happens at some point in time next year, but then dredging will happen even after that. So working through that process. The cemetery, we just had that conversation. So you might also be looking at like all those fees. What's our estimate for the net fees for what the cemetery will bring in? It's about $90,000. If you take out the direct costs of buying some of the materials to actually do, it leaves about $71,000 that gets transferred either to the public works or partly to the perpetual fund. And then I know the beach, and I did a couple slides here because I anticipated there'd be a lot of conversation or questions about the beach this year as we're trying to set budget for next year. A couple observation, construction is now complete, and we thank our project manager on that, Matt Pilon. I think he did a great job, and the comments that we got on the beach, people were very happy with respect to what they saw. It was a difficult season. Even the picture that's on the slide here illustrates some of the seaweed issues that we had there. July, we had 17 weather events that we were basically closed. So historically, we were budgeting based on previous parking on the beach, $422,000 in revenue. We did 154. After we even contracted expenses, net, the beach is down 150,000. Now, we had a beach reserve for bad years of about 200, so we'll be using that to fund the difference as we move forward into next year. We are looking at a number of initiatives to hopefully help adjust that, and I'll get to that on the next slide. when you do look at some of the comments that we got, feedback, people really like the washrooms. And I know it was only at the end of the year that we actually finally got because of supply chain, the ramp to be able to get up to the accessible washrooms, but they're very nice. You just wave your hand and the door will open and you can move right in. So I think they're very well received. A lot of people like take a toy, leave a toy. Staff had to clean it out often because I think sometimes some of the toys that got dropped in there were a little leave a toy. So we did work through that, but people were very impressed with that. People did say that the seaweed had to be cleaned up going forward. It is good news. We have been able to work with the MECP. They have updated and approved our beach maintenance manual, and they will let us pick up the dry seaweed going forward. So we will be having a protocol next year to move, dry, remove. Additional traffic safety was a common comment, even though we didn't have a lot of situations where people were really on the traffic driving through. And in this budget, we are looking at a combination, and we'll be working with Public Works on some sort of mechanism to delineate the walkway and not have parked cars along the railing as you're coming down Lake Road. We had some parked cars on it, and they were paying the additional rate for being close by. But if we remove those parked cars, people will be able to, we can delineate that as a walkway. People can walk down there, and we can open up what many people called as a drop-off zone, or also known as a kiss and ride. And that was a big thing that we didn't open up this year because we didn't know how the traffic was going to be. But if we create a traffic calming along the railway, we believe we can have the full kiss and ride and let people do the drop-off, and that will really smooth up. And I know, Council, you've asked for that, and I think we've worked out on how we can make that happen for next year. One thing that will be interesting, out of the funding that was got, a lot of people asked, do people prefer to pay the cheaper rate to park 300 meters back, or the people prefer to pay the higher rate and park right at the gate? It was very interesting to see that in our metrics. People, they didn't care about the price. They wanted the proximity to the gate. And they wanted the ability to be able to book in advance to guarantee themselves a spot. So when they showed up, they didn't have to go searching for a spot. That was very interesting. So going into next year, our revenue plan, we've tried to work out the number of spots. We're trying to put together, we took a number of pictures. We're working on marketing plans that we hope to get up by January and February of next year to really promote not just the washrooms, but the great beach, the access, the proximity. We are looking, it is a stretch goal at the 343. We do have the reserve left that's $50,000 that we'll be looking at as we go forward and keeping council up to date. We are looking at changing our app. Right now you can pay with Honk, or you can pay with a different app that we have. Because there's two apps, we want to become simple, so we're looking at having one app so you can pay no matter where you are. You can just use the one app, make it a little easier for people going forward. The backlot, we didn't have the pre-booking model, but these rates do have a pre-book. People really like the pre-book. They like to know that they're going to have a spot when they show up. So we recommend opening up that in the pre-book. We're also looking at hourly rates. We haven't finalized that because we're trying to do some modeling, but we'll have that early in 2024 that we can add some hourly rates if council. And if council has any recommendations or individuals in the community have any recommendations on hourly rates, we're happy to take those and work those in. Again, as I mentioned, we're working on a new website, a new advertisement campaign, and we continue to work with MECP with respect to beach maintenance, and we're very happy to say that the dry seaweed can be removed. And last year, like in July, anybody that went down there would see like it was hard packed, pretty hard, but now we'll actually be able to remove it with a spotter. And as I mentioned already, staff are reviewing the calming going forward. So I know it was a big year on the beach. I don't know if this is the time to break out all the beach questions, but we couldn't do a budget without talking about some of the implications, and weather is a big risk to how our beach operation works, and that's one of the reasons why we did bring in the annual passes. And interestingly enough, we sold 10 of the of the $350 passes for the all-inclusive, come whenever, guaranteed parking and that, and people were interested in that. And we did that without a huge marketing campaign because we were building the beach this year, and we're excited to put into play some marketing of our beach and see how that can hopefully grow, be positive.
Any questions? So, Councillor Bagu?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. The director and I we've had a couple of conversations regarding early morning walkers. I know when the beach is in operation with the bouncy toy, I guess I'd call it, the gate is locked overnight, and not till some staff arrive in the morning, and then when the bouncy castle goes, the gate's locked until later on in the day. Is there any way we could sort of accommodate these early morning walkers, that somebody could open up the gate? I don't know, I'm not asking for overtime or nothing like that from the director, but I think it'd be good. These people have used the beach for years and years, and then they come up now and they find a locked gate, whether it's there's some sort of way we can accommodate some of these people. I guess that's all I'm asking.
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and council, we will be able to accommodate them next year. We have some ideas on how to do it. We had a couple issues this year. One is the camera model that's coming out wasn't there, and we were worried because there's a lot of great people that come and walk, but then there's some that don't, right? So we are a little worried about, and we wanted to have the protection of the equipment. But on most days, we did have the gate open quite early. Our issue was, and I know we got, at the end of the season, we kind of had that mix up because we had one of the hottest days, I think, of the year in October, and then we didn't have the gates open for that week because we were trying to decommission the washrooms and all of this. So the Director of Public Works, myself, the new manager of Rec, we will be talking about how we can accommodate people longer next year and prepare for that extra hot week that we never know when we'll get it, but we always get it in September, October, and it's when you least expect it, or as soon as our student staffing goes down. That's normally when we get the hottest day of the year, it seems, but we will work to accommodate that better for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Aquilina?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, to Brian. Last summer, I think I brought this up, and we can talk about it offline if this isn't the venue for it, but in regards to the app, if somebody is using the app to pre-book a spot in the general area, like, and say they're from St. Catharines and don't get there till later, is there a connection between the staff and bylaw that when that resident or whoever books that there actually is going to be a spot available? Like, how can we mitigate those?
Through the deputy mayor to the councillor and councillor, the council actually identified in the current app, you could already pre-book a spot, but you couldn't actually, but it wasn't a guaranteed spot. So now we've worked with the app developer, and we can actually pre-book it and guarantee it between a combination of signage and limiting the number of spots that you can book in the location. So we can mitigate that issue going forward. So somebody who can't pre-book, show up and then find there's no spot for them.
Seeing no other questions, you can proceed.
So now we're getting to the end of kind of the budget. It's just about looking forward. Staff are looking forward at a number of initiatives in 2024 because as we complete a 2024 budget, you're already working on 25, 26 moving forward. One is we are looking at short-term rentals and the municipal accommodation tax and how that works with respect to the budget. We have one right now, and it's working at the marina and at the Shirkston Park. where you can go camping, etc. So we are looking at that, and there'll be more discussion in 2024. I know that Public Works started, and a number of initiatives kind of moved us into next year, but they are looking at talking to council in the new year about transportation, park and arena, etc. Service level standards, how often you pick up the garbage, for example, on West Street and things like that, because those are conversations that council hasn't had for some time, but they are big impacts on how budgets operate. We are looking at the rest of the fees that we haven't quite done the full cost recovery on. We are looking at that. We continue to work on some of our benchmarking, and you've seen some of that as we go forward already. We have the infrastructure needs assessment for nonlinear assets, so that's for our buildings. That's the building condition assessments for the parks, for IT. So we're working on a project right now that has to put together a multi-year plan on how our assets are maintained for buildings, etc. So that will be coming to you in June of 2024. We are updating development charges bylaw, which I've noted that I think a couple times, and our manager strategic initiatives have brought forward. That's going to have a number of projects that we'll be talking to council about. It's not that when we get to it, it's not necessarily, we bring it back to council, it's not necessarily about approving the final detail of every project. It's proving the direction of the project, so we start charging the development charge to individuals that are coming to the city and haven't had to pay for the infrastructure we currently have. It basically means growth will pay for growth. And we did tell council we've started to work on a multi-year budget. All departments have submitted to finance kind of their cost pressures for the next couple of years. We're working through payroll modeling for the next couple of years. So we hope by the time we get to June of 2024, we were hoping to be a little further along, but by the time we get to mid-year next year, we'll have some modeling, maybe not by department, but certainly by kind of like area, departments, PGA, boards and committees, to be able to identify kind of like what the cost pressures are over a multi-year framework. Because right now, we present to you 1 year, and we'd like to build it out so you can kind of see what some of the cost pressures are over multiple years. So we're not going to wait till next year's budget to give that to you. We're trying to work on that so we can give it to you when we get to around the first financial reporting, which is in June of next year based on the 2024 numbers. So those are a couple of things that are going forward to help fund next year, make decisions for next year's budget, but budgets aren't necessarily done on the night of the budget. A lot of it's done on the build-up, and these are a lot of the, I think, discussions that we hope to happen over the next several months. So after that, unless there's a question on that, I'll just say thank you very much and remind you of the recommendation in front of you, and if look forward to any more questions or direction from council.
Thank you, Director Bowles. Is there any questions on that last slide? Not seeing any. We do have the recommendation. The report recommends that Corporate Services Department Financial Services Division Report Number 2023-161, subject 2024 operating levy budget be received, and that the working capital reserve be funded up to the reserve fund policy target as outlined in report number 2023-161, and that the 2024 operating levy budget as outlined in report 2023-161 be approved. Any questions or comments? Councillor Bruno?
Mr. Acting Mayor, is this the time for the amendment?
This would be the time.
Okay. I'd like to move that the cemetery fees and schedule be updated to eliminate taxpayer subsidy and move to full cost recovery.
I think through the acting mayor to Councillor Bruno, I caucused with the clerk here behind your back as the treasurer is presenting. And there's two reports before council tonight. So 4.1 is the operating budget, and this will have an impact on the operating budget, but 4.2 is user fees and the schedules for next year, or for right away, I guess. So your amendment is going to be on the next staff report. So whatever determination council makes on this staff report, approved, deferred, referred, or not, I guess, please don't not approve it, because then we don't have a budget at all. That happened once. That we'll deal with 4.1, if that's okay with the acting mayor, and then 4.2 will be amended by your amendment.
Sorry, Councilor Bruno, yeah, I should have caught that myself. So the motion as presented, any questions? Councilor Bagu?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. If passed, and everything's passed next Tuesday, these rates that Councilor Bruno is proposing, do they take effect January 1st, 2024?
I see that
Or before?
the director is nodding his head, so
Okay.
it'd be,
So this would give people time, if they wanted to buy something, buy it now, well, get the Walmart special right now. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
any questions on the motion? There's no amendment, just on the motion as I read out. Councilor Danch?
Just because we're talking about the last day of our lives, I was approached by one of the funeral directors, and this is probably more of a regional question, but he's telling me that when they look after some of the homeless people that pass away, that the fixed charges that they receive hasn't been looked at in over 5 years. So I'm just throwing that out there that, you know, and I guess it's a regional thing. And I did talk to our regional rep there way back, and he was like, well, I didn't realize that was something else that we did. But I know those guys are going to come up with saying, like, we'd like to see a little bit of an adjustment on what we do for these people that have expired. So I'm just giving my 2 cents. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those in favor? That was unanimous. That's carried. Where am I at now? We'll move on to, we'll proceed with item 4.2-24, proposed user fees and charges, 2023-162. I have mover Councillor Hoyle, seconder Councillor Aquilina. The salient amounts have already been discussed during the presentation, so Director Bowles will not be providing any further presentation on this item. So we'll move right to the recommendation. The recommendation of the report is as follows: that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that Corporate Services Department Report 2023-162 be received, and that the 2024 proposed user fees and charges schedules attached as appendices A to S of Corporate Services Report 2023-162 be approved, and that the draft bylaw attached as Appendix T of Corporate Service Report 2023-162 be brought forward to Council for consideration. Questions on the motion? This is the time now. Yeah.
Thank
Councilor
you.
Bruno.
That with respect to cemetery services portion of the operating budget, that we move to full cost recovery effective January 1st, so that there was no municipal subsidy to the taxpayer.
Okay, can I get a seconder on the motion? Councillor Bodnar. Any questions on the amended motion, on the amendment? Do you have a question on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? Okay, that passes. Uh, yes. And now, any questions on the motion as it's amended? Sina? All those in favor of the motion as amended? All right, all those, that is carried. There are no correspondence items this evening. There are no presentations this evening. There are no delegations this evening. There are no procedural motions or information items this evening. So thank you for attending tonight's Committee of the Whole budget meeting. The next regular council meeting will be held on October 24, 2023. This meeting is now adjourned.